My new daughter-in-law poured an entire glass of red wine down the front of my only good shirt at her wedding reception, then leaned close enough that I could smell the champagne on her breath. Oops, maybe you should go home and change, Harry. You're embarrassing everyone. She said it loud enough for the nearest 3 tables to hear. Guests turned. Some covered their mouths. A few laughed. I stood there in the grand ballroom of the Whitfield estate, wine bleeding through my white dress shirt like a wound, and I watched her smile the way a person smiles when they've just won something they've been planning to win for months. What she didn't realize was that her own father was standing 15 feet behind her, frozen in the doorway, staring at me like he'd just seen a ghost rise from the dead. And when he spoke my name, the name he hadn't spoken in 22 years, everything Chloe Davenport believed about power and worth came crashing down around her designer heels. Have you ever been publicly humiliated by someone who was supposed to love your family? Share your story in the comments and tell us where you're watching from. Your experience might help someone else going through the same thing. At my son's wedding, I was looking for my place card among the family tables, heart swelling with a pride that almost hurt. 30 years raising Ryan on my own, and here he was, standing tall in his black tuxedo, jaw set the way his mother's used to be when she was determined about something. I found my name, not at table 2 with the Brennan relatives, not at table 3 with close family friends. Harold Brennan, tucked between elegant events catering and riverside floral design at table 14, the vendor table, pushed against the back wall near the kitchen doors. The florist noticed my confusion first. She was arranging a centerpiece and glanced at my card. You must be somebody's uncle? Father of the groom, I said quietly. Before she could respond, Chloe appeared at my side. Her wedding gown was immaculate, every bead in place, her smile sharp enough to leave marks. Harry, there you are. Settling in? I think there's been a mix-up, I said, keeping my voice low. This is with the vendors. Her laugh was like ice cracking. No mix-up. I thought you'd be more comfortable here, with people who understand working for a living. You know, your kind of crowd. The words landed harder than a punch. I kept my composure. Chloe, I'd like to sit with my family. She tilted her head, eyes glittering. Ryan's family is at the head table. Well, you're different. You understand. I didn't understand, and I never would. But before I could say another word, she was already gliding away, her gown trailing behind her like a flag of victory. I should tell you how we got here. My wife Catherine died on a Thursday, pancreatic cancer, 5 months from diagnosis to gone. Ryan was 3 years old, still young enough to ask every morning when Mama was coming home. I'd hold him on my lap in our kitchen in Syracuse, the one with the cracked tile floor Catherine always said she'd fix, and I'd tell him Mama was somewhere beautiful, somewhere with no pain. Can we visit? He asked once. Not yet, buddy, but she's watching us, every single day. I made a promise to her photograph the night after the funeral. I stood in our bedroom, Ryan asleep on my chest, and I told her I'd give him everything. Everything she would have given him, and more. I was a carpenter, had been since I dropped out of community college at 19, Brennan custom woodwork. Nothing fancy. Kitchen cabinets, bookshelves, deck repairs, the occasional bathroom renovation. My hands were rough before Ryan was born. After Catherine died, they turned to sandpaper. I brought him with me to job sites when Mrs. Patterson next door couldn't watch him. He'd sit on an overturned bucket, handing me nails, chattering about dinosaurs in space while I measured and cut and sanded. What's that sound, Dad? That's the saw talking to the wood, telling it what shape to become. He loved that. Always made him laugh. Long days. Double shifts when I could get them. Weekends spent finishing other people's dream kitchens while ours stayed the same, cracked tile and outdated appliances. But Ryan never went without. New sneakers every fall. Birthday parties with his friends. A science camp one summer that cost me 3 months of side jobs. When he graduated high school as valedictorian, I worked overtime for 4 straight months to buy him a decent laptop for college. Syracuse University wasn't cheap, but I made it work. Peanut butter sandwiches for dinner so his meal plan was covered. Wearing the same work boots until the soles wore through so he could have textbooks. Dad, you don't have to do all this, he said once, looking at my patched jacket with something close to shame. Everything I do because I want to, son. Don't ever feel bad about it. He called every Sunday from his dorm, "How's business, Dad?" And I'd say, "Keeping busy," even when I wasn't. Even when the second mortgage was eating me alive and the credit cards were maxed, and I lay awake at night running numbers that never added up. He came home with an engineering degree, landed a position at a defense contractor outside of Hartford, and started building exactly the life I'd dreamed for him. That's when he met Chloe at a corporate fundraiser. Suddenly, my Sunday dinners became monthly visits, then holiday obligations. "She's incredible, Dad," he told me, eyes bright the way Catherine's used to get. "Yale Law. Brilliant. Driven. Her family's in commercial real estate." What he didn't say was that she was everything his father wasn't. Chloe entered our lives like a polished storm. Within 6 months, our neighborhood was sketchy. My workshop was that little garage thing. My work clothes were not appropriate for photos. She reorganized Ryan's world piece by piece, and I watched my son slowly disappear into someone else's idea of who he should be. 3 weeks before the wedding, I found myself standing outside Marchand's in downtown Hartford, adjusting my tie for the 4th time. Ryan had insisted I meet Chloe's family at this restaurant where the appetizers cost more than my weekly grocery budget. "You'll love them, Dad," he said. "Her mom's really elegant, and her brother just made partner at his firm. Very accomplished family." The hostess looked at my department store blazer the way you'd look at a stain on white linen before leading me to a corner table where Chloe sat with a pearl-draped woman and a sharp-jawed man scrolling through his phone. Harry. Chloe's smile was blinding. "Meet my mother, Diane, and my brother, Garrett." Diane's handshake was limp, her eyes already dismissing me. Garrett didn't look up from his screen. "So you're the carpenter," Diane said, the way someone might identify a species of insect. "Custom woodworking," I corrected gently. 30 years now." "How quaint," she replied. The word dripped with condescension. Chloe ordered wine, a bottle that cost more than what I spent on food in a week. The conversation flowed around me like I was furniture, stock portfolios, vacation homes on the Cape, private schools for future grandchildren. "Ryan's doing wonderfully at Hargrove Defense," Chloe said. "He's finally making something of himself." That word, finally. As if everything before her was just Ryan treading water. When the check came, Chloe made a show of reaching for her purse, then paused. "Oh, Harry, would you mind?" Family tradition. The groom's side hosts. The total made my chest tighten. $312. More than I spent on food in a month. But with 3 pairs of eyes watching, judging, I pulled out my credit card. "So generous," Diane said, without an ounce of gratitude. After they left, Ryan caught up with me on the sidewalk. "You were quiet tonight, Dad." "Just listening, son. Learning about Chloe's world." "So what do you think?" I looked at my son. My brilliant, kind, hard-working boy who'd been raised to treat everyone with respect. "I think she's very different from us." "Different isn't bad, Dad." "No," I agreed. "But it isn't always good either." That night, lying in my small bedroom in Syracuse, I stared at the ceiling and understood that something fundamental had shifted. That dinner wasn't about getting to know family. It was a test. A test designed for me to fail. And I'd paid $312 for the privilege of taking it. A week after that dinner, I was sanding a cabinet door in my workshop when I heard heels clicking on the concrete floor. Chloe stood in my workspace. Her cashmere coat as out of place as a diamond in a toolbox. "Harry, we need to talk." She'd never been to my shop before. I wiped my hands on a rag and noticed how her nose wrinkled at the smell of wood stain and sawdust. "What can I do for you, Chloe?" "It's about Ryan. About boundaries." She walked around a pile of lumber, her heels tapping like a countdown. "When people get married, they start fresh." I set down my sandpaper. "What kind of boundaries?" "Ryan needs space to grow, to become the man he's meant to be." Her smile could have cut steel. "Someone who fits in my world, not someone dragged down by a blue-collar past." "You're talking about his family." "I'm talking about moving forward instead of backward." She examined her manicured nails. "Ryan's been offered a transfer to our firm's New York office. Excellent opportunity. A chance to really become someone. He's already someone." She laughed, and the sound bounced off the workshop walls. "Harry, look around. This is what he's trying to leave behind." I stepped closer. For the first time, something flickered in her eyes. Recognition that she was on my territory now. "Let me be clear," she continued, recovering quickly. The wedding is in 2 weeks. After that, Ryan and I start fresh. Clean slate. That means less interference from his past. Interference? I'm his father. You're his old life. Her voice went winter cold. And old lives hold people back from reaching their potential. I'd heard enough. Chloe, I think you should leave. Of course. She turned toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Harry? That dinner last week. Consider it a farewell party. After the wedding, these family gatherings won't be necessary. She walked to her Mercedes, then called back over her shoulder. Ryan doesn't need his past holding him back. Neither do I. I watched her taillights disappear into the Syracuse evening. Mrs. Patterson was watching from her kitchen window. She'd heard every word. That night I sat staring at Catherine's photograph. She wants to erase us, sweetheart, I whispered. I looked around the house through Chloe's eyes. Worn furniture, family photos everywhere, sawdust tracked in from the workshop. The life of a working man built from nothing. But this wasn't nothing. This was love. This was sacrifice. 30 years of a father making a good man. I picked up the phone to call Ryan, then set it down. What would I say? That his fiancée had declared war on his family? Chloe had made her move. Now I had to decide mine. The wedding was 13 days away, and I finally understood what I was fighting for. Not just my relationship with my son, but his very soul. 2 days after Chloe's visit to my workshop, I was sitting in Rosie's diner on James Street, staring at my black coffee and wrestling with something I couldn't name. That's when Tony Marino slid into the booth across from me. You look terrible, Harry. Tony and I went back 20 years. He'd hired me to build the cabinets in his law office when he was just starting out. Now he ran a small but sharp practice downtown, the kind that took cases others wouldn't touch. He kept his ear to the ground. Woman trouble, I said. The kind that wears a wedding dress. Tony added sugar to his coffee. Tell me about her. So I did. The restaurant humiliation, the workshop confrontation, the way she looked at my neighborhood like it carried disease. Tony listened without interrupting, his legal mind trained to catalog details. Chloe Davenport, he said when I finished. Works at Monroe, Strauss & Associates. You know her? Know of her. My firm dealt with them on a real estate matter last year. Tony's expression darkened. Harry, your future daughter-in-law isn't just ambitious. She's ruthless. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his notes. Chloe Davenport, 27, Yale Law, graduated with honors. Specializes in corporate acquisitions. Also specializes in acquiring things that aren't for sale. What do you mean? 6 months ago, she helped a developer push out a family-owned hardware store that had been on that block for 60 years. The owner was 82. Before that, she convinced an elderly client to restructure his estate, cutting out his daughter who'd been caring for him for a decade. Tony looked me in the eye. She sees people as obstacles or assets, nothing in between. My stomach turned. And Ryan? Asset. Young, successful engineer with a clean reputation and no baggage. Tony gestured toward me. Except his blue-collar father. Exactly. Tony leaned forward. Harry, people like her don't just want to win. They want to erase any evidence there was ever a competition. The diner felt smaller. The coffee turned bitter in my mouth. So what do I do? You don't fight fire with fire. You let her burn herself out. Tony's voice carried the authority of a man who'd won cases by patience, not force. People like Chloe make mistakes when they think they've already won. They get careless, overconfident, and if she doesn't make a mistake, then you make sure Ryan sees who she really is before it's too late. Tony gripped my shoulder across the table. But Harry, don't try to break them apart. Just be there when the mask falls. Because it will fall. Walking back to my truck, I felt something I hadn't felt since Chloe first entered our lives. Hope. Not the desperate kind that clings to impossible dreams, but the steady kind that comes from having a plan. Tony was right. Chloe would make mistakes. People like her always did. Because they couldn't imagine a world where their charm didn't work, where their money didn't matter, where someone might value character over status. 13 days until the wedding. 13 days to be the father Ryan needed, not the enemy Chloe wanted me to be. The call came at 11:45, the night before the wedding. I was sitting in my living room, looking at the suit I'd pressed for tomorrow, when my phone buzzed. Dad, Ryan's voice cracked like he was 12 years old again. What's wrong, son? Silence stretched across the line, filled with the sound of crickets outside my window and something heavier. The weight of doubt pressing down on a young man's shoulders. "Can you come over? I know it's late, but I need to talk." 20 minutes later, I was standing in Ryan's apartment in Hartford. He opened the door, rumpled, hair wild, eyes red. The place was spotless as always. Chloe's influence. But Ryan looked like he'd been pacing for hours. "She's at her bachelorette party," he said, pouring coffee with shaking hands. "Won't be back until morning." I sat on his pristine gray sofa. The one Chloe had chosen because it was modern. Everything in the apartment was modern. Cold, expensive, and nothing like the warm chaos of the home where I'd raised him. "Talk to me, Ryan." He collapsed into the chair across from me. "Dad, what if I'm making a mistake?" The question hung between us like a loaded weapon. I'd been waiting weeks to hear it, but now that it was here, I chose my words carefully. "What makes you think that?" "Little things. The way she talks about where we grew up, about you, about—" He rubbed his face with both hands. "Last week she told me we should consider moving to Manhattan after the honeymoon. A fresh start, she called it. What do you think about that?" Scared. The word came out barely above a whisper. "Dad, I love her. I do. But sometimes I feel like I'm disappearing into whoever she wants me to be." "Tell me." "She doesn't like when I mention growing up in Syracuse. Says it makes me sound provincial. She wants me to tell people I went to prep school instead of public school. She even suggested I tell her colleagues you were retired. Instead of—" He trailed off. "Instead of a carpenter who still works with his hands." Yeah, every word was a knife twisting, but I kept my face neutral. "And what do you tell people?" "The truth. That my dad is the hardest working man I've ever known. That he gave up everything so I could have opportunities he never had." Ryan's voice grew stronger. "But she looks at me like I've embarrassed her." "Son, do you remember what I told you when you got that scholarship to Syracuse?" A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "That I earned it, but I should never forget where I came from." "And do you remember why I said that?" "Because where we come from doesn't define our limits. It defines our values." I nodded. "The question isn't whether Chloe loves you, Ryan. The question is whether she loves who you actually are, or only who she thinks you could become." He was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands. Hands that had learned to work alongside mine in the workshop. Hands that held me tight at Catherine's funeral. Hands about to put a ring on a woman who wanted to erase half of who he was. "I don't know what to do, Dad." "You don't have to decide tonight, son. But tomorrow, when you're standing at that altar, ask yourself one question. Does this woman make you want to be a better version of yourself, or a completely different person?" I stood to leave and kissed the top of his head the way I'd done when he was small. "Whatever you decide, I'll be there. That's what fathers do." Driving home through the empty streets, I felt something shift in my chest. Not victory, not vindication, just truth, finally getting room to breathe. The wedding morning broke clear and cold. October sunlight poured through my bedroom window. I'd barely slept after Ryan's call, but I felt calm as I pressed my navy suit one last time. In the bathroom mirror, I saw a 63-year-old man with more gray than brown in his hair. Deep lines carved by weather and worry. Not handsome, not wealthy, but honest. Catherine's ring hung warm against my chest on its silver chain. My talisman, my reminder of promises kept. "Whatever happens today, sweetheart," I whispered to her photo. I did my best. The ceremony was at St. Matthew's, the same church where Catherine and I had married 32 years ago. The irony that Chloe had chosen it, probably for the architecture, wasn't lost on me. I arrived early and watched guests pull up in cars that cost more than my annual income. Ryan stood at the altar in his black tuxedo, hands clasped, eyes searching the pews until they found mine. I nodded once. Steady, calm, present. Chloe appeared at the back of the church like she'd stepped from a magazine cover. Stunning, confident, every detail perfect. Her brother Garrett walked her down the aisle with theatrical flair. Their father, she'd explained earlier, had a last-minute business conflict and couldn't attend the ceremony but would be at the reception. Vows were spoken, rings exchanged, the kiss shared to polite applause. Ryan was married, and I was officially relegated to his past. The Whitfield Estate ballroom glittered with crystal and white orchids. I searched for my name among the elegant place cards, found it at table 14. With the vendors, again, The same deliberate exile. That's when it happened. That's when I made my move toward the family table, and Chloe made hers. I walked toward table 2 with quiet determination. Ryan's Aunt Martha looked up and smiled, patting the empty chair beside her. "Harry, dear, we saved you a spot." Before I could reach it, Chloe appeared like a shadow in white silk. "Harry, I believe your assigned seat is over there." Her voice was honey and venom, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "I'm comfortable with my family," I said, reaching for the chair. She was holding a glass of Cabernet. What happened next wasn't an accident. I know that because of the angle, the aim, the way her wrist turned with practiced precision. The wine hit my chest in a perfect arc, soaking through my white shirt, splattering my navy jacket, dripping onto the marble floor. The room went silent. "Oh, how clumsy of me," Chloe said, pressing her hand to her mouth in mock horror. "Harry, you should probably go home and change. You're making a scene." Laughter, scattered, uncomfortable, but there. Guests whispering behind their hands, others staring in open shock. The wine was warm against my skin, spreading like a stain on everything I'd built. I stood there, dripping, and I looked her in the eye. I saw the cold satisfaction of someone who believed she had just won the final battle. Ryan rushed over, face white. "Dad, what happened? Are you okay?" "Just a little spill, son. Nothing that won't wash out." Chloe placed her manicured hand on Ryan's arm. "Your father bumped into my glass. Poor thing. Maybe the excitement is too much for him." The lies came so easily, wrapped in silk, delivered with a smile. That's when I heard it. A voice from the entrance. Not loud, but it cut through the murmur of the ballroom like a blade through cloth. Good God! Harry Brennan. Every head turned. A tall man with silver hair and military bearing stood in the doorway, frozen mid-step. He wore an expensive charcoal suit, but his posture was unmistakably that of a soldier. His eyes were locked on me, and they were wide with something I can only describe as stunned reverence. Chloe's smile flickered. "Daddy, you made it." But Richard Davenport wasn't looking at his daughter. He was crossing the ballroom floor in long, urgent strides, his gaze never leaving my face. When he reached me, wine-soaked and standing in a puddle of Cabernet, he did something nobody in that room expected. He embraced me, held me tight the way a man holds someone he owes his life to. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard's voice carried across the marble floor with the authority of a man accustomed to being heard. "I need you to understand something." He released me and turned to face the room. His eyes were glistening. "This man is Harry Brennan. In the winter of 2003, my daughter was 6 years old. She was in the back seat of my car when a drunk driver ran a red light and hit us head-on at 40 miles an hour. My car flipped twice and caught fire. I was unconscious. Chloe was trapped in her car seat, screaming. The ballroom went dead silent. Even the string quartet had stopped. This man," Richard pointed at me, "this man was driving the car behind us. He didn't hesitate. He didn't call someone else. He ran to the burning car with his bare hands and pulled my 6-year-old daughter out of the wreckage. Then he went back in for me." The car exploded 45 seconds after he dragged me clear. A collective gasp rippled through the room. I spent 6 weeks in the hospital, 3 surgeries. But I lived. My daughter lived, because of Harry Brennan. Richard's voice broke. A carpenter from Syracuse who didn't know us, didn't owe us anything, and never asked for a single thing in return. He turned to me. "I've been looking for you for 22 years, Harry. 22 years. I hired private investigators. I put ads in newspapers. The paramedics said you refused treatment and left before anyone got your name. All I had was a description. Working man, calloused hands, drove an old blue pickup. My hands were shaking. Not from weakness, from the weight of a moment I never imagined would come. I saw you through the window as I arrived," Richard continued. "Saw you standing there with wine all over your shirt. Saw the way people were laughing. And I knew it was you. The same way I knew it 22 years ago when I opened my eyes on that stretcher and saw you walking away." He turned to Chloe. The color had drained from her face. "Victoria." His voice went quiet, which made it more terrifying. "Do you know what I saw when I walked in?" She couldn't speak. "I saw my daughter humiliate the man who saved her life. The man who pulled her from a burning car when she was screaming for her daddy. The man who went back into the flames for me. Daddy, I didn't know. You didn't want to know. Richard's voice was sharp as a scalpel. You saw a carpenter from Syracuse and decided he wasn't worth your time. You saw a working man and assumed he'd never done anything important. Ryan stepped forward. Understanding was breaking across his face like sunrise. Dad, he said softly, you never told me. It wasn't about telling, son. It was just what needed doing. Just what needed doing, Richard repeated, shaking his head. That's exactly what you said 22 years ago when the paramedic asked why you went into the fire. Just what needed doing. Michael turned to Chloe. His face had gone through every stage, shock, confusion, understanding, and had landed on something quiet and devastating. Clarity. Chloe, you seated my father with the vendors. You poured wine on his shirt. You tried to send him home. Ryan, I can explain. You told me he was an embarrassment. You told me his life, our life, was something to leave behind. Ryan's voice was steady now, the way it gets when a man stops fighting what he already knows. But that man, that carpenter you wanted to erase, he's the reason you're alive. He's the reason your father is standing here today. She reached for him. He stepped back. Ryan, please. I didn't know who he was. That's exactly the point, Chloe. His voice cracked for the first time. It shouldn't have mattered who he was. He's my father. That should have been enough. The ballroom was completely silent. 200 guests watching a fairy tale come undone in real time. Ryan looked at me. His eyes were bright with tears, but his jaw was set the way Catherine's used to be, determined. Dad, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I let her. You have nothing to apologize for, son. You followed your heart. That's what I raised you to do. No, he shook his head. You raised me to know the difference between who a person pretends to be and who they really are. And I forgot that. I got so caught up in her world that I forgot mine. He turned back to Chloe. Slowly, deliberately, he reached down and took her hand. For a moment, I thought he was going to stay. That love would win over truth, the way it sometimes does when you're 29 and the world still feels like it's made of possibilities. But then he slid the wedding band off his finger and placed it gently in her palm. Chloe, I thought I loved you, but I loved who you pretended to be when you were around me. That's not the same thing. She stood there in her perfect wedding dress, surrounded by guests who now looked at her with something between pity and disgust. Her fairy tale was crumbling. Her brother Garrett was staring at his phone, pretending none of this was happening. Diane sat at the head table with her mouth open, pearls gleaming uselessly around her throat. Richard Davenport walked over to me and extended his hand. I took it, and he pulled me into another embrace. 22 years, he whispered. I never stopped looking for you. I never needed you to find me, Colonel. I was just glad you and your little girl were okay. He pulled back and looked at me with wet eyes. She was my little girl, and you gave her back to me. I only wish she'd grown up to deserve the gift. Ryan came to my side, put his arm around my shoulder the way he used to when he was small and the world felt too big. Dad, can we go home? The real home? Always, son. Always. We walked out of the Whitfield estate together, father and son, into the October evening. The air was clean and sharp, the kind of cold that wakes you up and reminds you that you're alive. Behind us, the ballroom buzzed with the sound of 200 people realizing they'd witnessed something they'd never forget. Catherine's ring was warm against my chest. I'd kept my promise, every bit of it, not by fighting, not by scheming, just by being the man she married, the man who showed up, the man whose hands were rough from building things that mattered. Ryan was quiet for a while as we drove through the darkening streets. Then he spoke. Dad, why did you never tell me? About the accident, about saving them. I kept my eyes on the road. Because it wasn't something to tell, son. It was something that happened. I saw a car on fire with a little girl screaming inside. I didn't think. I just moved. Just what needed doing. Exactly. He was quiet again. Then, Mom would have done the same thing. My throat tightened. Your mother would have been in that car before I was. She was the brave one, Ryan. I just borrowed it from her. He laughed. The first real laugh I'd heard from him in months. It sounded like home. We pulled into our driveway an hour later. The porch light was on, the way I always left it. Mrs. Patterson's curtain twitched. She'd been watching for us. The house looked small in the dark, with its patched roof and the workshop out back and Catherine's rose bushes. long past blooming, lining the walkway. Ryan stood on the porch and looked around like he was seeing it for the first time. "I missed this," he said quietly. "I missed this so much, and I didn't even know it." I put my hand on his shoulder. "It was always here, son, waiting for you." We sat in the kitchen that night, the one with the cracked tile floor, drinking coffee from the same mugs we'd used since he was in high school. He talked about Chloe, really talked about her, for the first time. Not the version he'd sold himself on, but the real version. The dismissals, the manipulations, the slow, careful way she disconnected him from everything he was. "I kept thinking it was me," he said, "that I wasn't good enough for her world. But it was never about being good enough. It was about being erasable. You were never erasable, Ryan. You were just temporarily misplaced." He smiled. Catherine's smile, the one that could light up a room even when everything in it was broken. "Dad? Yeah? Thank you. For being there tonight. For being there every night for 30 years. For never once making me feel like I wasn't enough." I reached across the table and squeezed his hand, rough hand to rough hand. Carpenter and engineer, father and son. That's what fathers do. In a world full of stories about betrayal, what happened to me at my son's wedding taught me something I already knew but needed to be reminded of. Character isn't built in moments of comfort. It's forged in moments of humiliation. When Chloe poured that wine on my shirt, she revealed more about herself than she ever did about me. God has a way of using the actions of our enemies to reveal our true strength. The most powerful family stories aren't found in history books. They're lived in workshops and at kitchen tables and in quiet moments of sacrifice that nobody else sees. My journey from that wine-stained moment to the truth reminds us that the Lord sees every act of service, every tear shed for family, every dollar stretched to make dreams possible. What makes these stories so compelling is watching how people react when their integrity is tested. Ryan had to choose between the polished life Chloe offered and the authentic love his father had always given. Sometimes God allows us to be knocked down so we can see who truly helps us back up. True wealth isn't measured in stock portfolios or designer labels. It's measured in the lives we touch and the values we pass on. My legacy wasn't built in boardrooms. It was built in moments where I chose my son's well-being over my own comfort, trusting that God would honor my faithfulness. True nobility comes from noble actions, not noble birth. Did my journey of resilience and redemption inspire you to reflect on your own family bonds? Leave a comment sharing what this story meant to you. Your thoughts might encourage someone else facing similar challenges. Subscribe to join our community of storytellers and share this powerful reminder that love and truth always triumph over pride and pretense.